A year ago, it was drought, not hail, rain, and wind that devastated Oklahoma's wheat crop and left many farmers teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. But what a difference a year makes. As the wheat harvest nears completion, farmers have seen a dramatic turnaround in this year's crop, with many predicting the biggest harvest the state has seen in several years.
Sitting in the cab of one of Chuck Tolley's combines, it's easy to imagine a ship sailing through an ocean of wheat. The Grant County farmer owns more than 3,000 acres near Deer Creek in northern Oklahoma, about 4.5 miles from the Kansas border. He and his crew, which consists of family and workers recruited from the area, have been working as fast as they can to bring in this year's crop.
Well, I only have 2 sons. You got 2? Yeah, the rest of them are kids from our local high school. Right. Well, actually, a pair of brothers work for me. It's a family operation. That's my youngest son in the combine in front of us. It helps when you have boys in high school. You know which kids you want to have on the farm and which ones you don't.
Tolley is a 5th-generation farmer who's familiar with all the challenges facing wheat producers. In recent years, Oklahoma suffered everything from drought to hail to floods, making life difficult for the farmers who depend on a good harvest for their economic survival.
The weather has not really been on our side, I will say that, but wheat's just such a tough crop.
It's been a completely different story this year. Mike Schulte, executive director of the Oklahoma Wheat Commission, says everything has come together to produce what promises to be a bountiful harvest.
This past year, we just happened to receive the moisture at the right time. Last year, we were in a severe drought. 2 years before that, we had a late freeze situation that hindered us. That was really bad for our harvest.
The 2011 harvest was one of the smallest in recent memory, in marked contrast to this year's crop.
USDA has us at estimates of coming in at 154.8 million bushels of wheat. That's more than double of where we were last year at this time. Last year our harvest was at 70.4 million bushels of wheat. If you look at the 5-year average for the state, that number usually is around 110 million bushels, so we're even well over the 5-year average for Oklahoma.
Chuck Tolley was one of the lucky ones last year. His land escaped the worst of the drought.
We cut good wheat right here locally, but the vast majority of the state had a very, very poor crop. Yes. A lot of failed acres. Yes. We cut a pretty decent crop last year.
Tolley expects this year's harvest to be as good or better.
Our crop this year we're seeing is very similar to last year's in yield and test weight. The biggest difference is we're so much earlier. Last year we started cutting on June the 2nd, and this year I think we were May the 22nd. That's the earliest I've ever started harvesting wheat ever.
Similar stories are being told throughout Oklahoma. Farmers have been scrambling to stay ahead of the wheat as the harvest moves rapidly from south to north.
Harvest in southwest Oklahoma, as we're speaking today, is 99% complete, and it's just right up to Memorial Day weekend. That's normally the time that we start harvest in southwest Oklahoma. It has progressed fast through the central part of the state, even up into the northern parts of Oklahoma, where there are places that are 40 to 70% complete.
Even with the early harvest, production forecasts remain high.
Usually when we have an early harvest, it usually means that the yields are not going to be as high, but we just had moisture conditions. We didn't have a late freeze scenario. It all kind of worked out for us here in Oklahoma, and so we've been able to get the wheat out early and still have those high yields.
The biggest problem now is finding space to store all that grain. The first load of wheat began arriving at elevators early in May, and storage space is now at a premium. Jay Minton is the manager of Plains Partners Service Center in Okarche.
Here we've been at it for 2 weeks, and we're probably typically used to doing this. What we've done in 2 weeks, we usually do in 3 or 4. So space is filled up fast. Trucks are running hot and heavy, but there's just nowhere to go at the current time.
Minton says they did as much business in the first 3 days of this harvest season as they did all of last year. The speed at which the harvest is moving is posing challenges for the custom cutting crews that many producers rely on to bring in the crop.
Once it started in southwest Oklahoma, the wheat was ready in the central and northern parts of the state. There have been areas where the custom cutting crews have pulled out to go ahead and move north, so that has slowed harvest in some of the southern regions of the state. But we're thinking that, you know, producers are going to pull together like they always do and that we will get through it.
Harvest time means long days for producers like Tully, running from 6:30 in the morning until past midnight. To speed up the process, he unloads on the go. A tractor towing an 800-bushel grain cart pulls up alongside, letting the combine release its load of grain even as it continues harvesting. That means more acres and more bushels cut each day. Tully estimates he's harvesting anywhere from 30 to 50 bushels an acre, and the test weights are high.
We haven't had any test weights below 61, which 60 makes it class 1 weed, so, or grade 1 weed, so. We've even had one load that went 66, which is the highest I've ever had in my life.
Those higher test weights mean a greater yield and more money for the farmer.
Test weights started out early, 59, 60, 61, 62 pounds. As we went through the first week, there was a rain shower one weekend. We dropped test weights maybe half a pound, saw a lot of 59s, and then got back to 60 pound once things kind of dried out again.
Just as important as the high yields are the protein levels. Protein is what gives wheat flour its strength, and higher protein levels will produce a higher quality bread. Ideally, protein levels should be around 12 to 13%.
What we're seeing on proteins are all across the board. It seems like the heavier test weight wheat, higher yielding wheat, we see proteins 10s, maybe 11. You get in other areas where the test weight's a little lighter, maybe was stressed a little bit more, proteins 11.5, 12, 13 protein.
At the grain elevators, wheat is currently fetching more than $6 a bushel, nearly twice last year's prices.
Prices have actually held better than in recent years, where typically you see prices decline at harvest, but we've stayed pretty steady. I think as we get into the Kansas harvest, then being that Kansas is the largest wheat producing state, that will have the biggest impact on the price.
Prices have slumped a bit in recent days, but overall, the economic trends remain positive.
We have had less wheat acres planted in some of the northern central parts of the United States. A lot of that's gone into corn and soybeans, and our export markets have really picked up. There's great demand in China. There's fear of there being drought concerns still in Russia.
Even the storms that passed through Oklahoma earlier in the week failed to dim prospects for a good harvest. Although hail inflicted minor damage on some fields, most of the affected areas had already been cut. Schulte expects the harvest to be completed by June 20th. It's a harvest that producers are welcoming after the disaster of 2011.